Welcome back to the Leadership Lab. I'm Evan McGoogan, former naval officer with over a decade of experience in special operations. I graduated from the United States Naval Academy. I earned an MBA, and I also hold a master's in psychology and leadership from Penn State. Today, I advise executives, elite coaches, athletes, working professionals, and tradesmen in leadership development. This channel is where I take that mix of academic research, pressure tested experience, and I translate it into practical lessons that you can use to lead, motivate, and win. So let's get into today's topic. And it starts with a really simple but powerful question that leaders often ask. Is how do I get underperformers to step up? Question I got recently, and the inspiration for today's video is how do you get underperformers to perform well? Now, there's a lot of reasons why some people might underperform. Sometimes they're underutilized, sometimes their strengths aren't being used, and some underperform because they're in the wrong role or the wrong division of labor. And others struggle because of missing skills, missing motivation, or even challenges at their home. And so the best leaders can't fix all of that overnight, but you do have one really powerful and simple tool that you can use right now. And it's cheap, it's simple, and it works really well. And that tool is feedback. And that doesn't mean vague praise, it doesn't mean routine check boxes. High quality feedback is something that's clear and it's precise and it's tailored to the individual that you're mentoring. So today I'm going to show you why it works, how to give it, how to receive it, and then a newer concept called feed forward that I would encourage you to use in addition to feedback. And to anchor this, I'm going to lean on a 2022 study in the Leadership Quarterly by two authors of the names of Michalis Drouvelis and Paula Paiardina. I hope I'm saying those names right. And their study was titled Feedback Quality and Performance in Organizations. And so their work empirically shows that the quality of feedback, not just the act of giving feedback, can be the difference between someone who improves and someone who eventually checks out. So we're going to ground this in research, and then I'm going to walk you through how you can apply it to your leadership roles. So again, underperformance has many causes, and you can't solve all of them today. But what you can do is you can change the way that you communicate, and that starts with how you give feedback, but how you give feedback in a way that's done well. So let's break down why feedback quality matters. Now, one of the reasons why feedback quality is so important for leaders is that it's one of the cheapest tools a leader has at their disposal, and it can have some of the most outsized returns. It doesn't require budget approvals, it doesn't require bonus plans. All it takes is precision and clarity in the language that you use. Now, the problem that a lot of leaders have with giving feedback is that they do so in a way that it's just plain terrible. You've heard it, I've heard it. You get something like, good job, keep at it, or you get some sort of annual review that says, you're meeting expectations. And while that is pawned off as feedback, that is not actually what feedback is supposed to be, and it's not what feedback is meant to be. That's more of a filler exercise so that that person can say that they gave feedback. It doesn't tell people what to repeat. It doesn't tell people what to change. It doesn't tell them how they compare to others in terms of their performance. And for those that are underperforming, vague feedback is one of the worst things that you can give someone. That person that's underperforming that gets that vague feedback doesn't know what's wrong. They don't know what to fix. And then they eventually start guessing. Guessing turns into frustration. Unresolved frustration eventually is going to turn into disengagement. So it's really important to remember that when you give feedback, you're not doing it in a way that's a statement. Feedback is more of a process of inquiry. And so if you're a leader, you need to start with some really pointed questions. Ask yourself, why is this person underperforming? Is it a competence issue? Do they have the skills needed to perform the tasks that you've given them? Is it a commitment issue? Are they motivated? Are they reliable? Or is it a circumstance issue? Is something going on at their home? Or is there a relationship issue on the team that you're not aware of? And so it's worth thinking about whether or not you've even asked the people that you lead these questions. It's worth asking yourself whether or not you've considered these things while you're constructing your feedback. And you will often be surprised with how often you've overlooked something, or how often people will flat out tell you that there's something going on at home or there's a relationship issue in the team that you're unaware of, as long as they're not worried about the reprisals. And so once you have a sense of how to answer these questions, you can decide, well, do they need mentorship? Do they need training? And if they need training, what kind? Do they need clear expectations? Is there a way that I can be more precise in the language that I'm using? Or do they just need time to season in their role? All of which are potential solutions to this problem of feedback. So while you're trying to figure that out, you still need to raise output. And that's why your feedback quality matters so much. And so there's three forms of feedback, generally speaking, that you have at your disposal. The first type of feedback is data driven feedback. That's going to be statistics, that's going to be process metrics. And these are things that show how a project or a process is running from a metrics perspective. You also have environmental feedback, which is market research, customer sentiment, feedback from your partners, which show how the outside world views your work. And then the third form of feedback that you can use is interpersonal feedback, which is one person to another. Now, this is the most common form of feedback that you're going to encounter, but unfortunately, it's also the most mismanaged from a leadership perspective. Now, we all know that good data or good research needs planning and rules to be integrated well. Person to person feedback needs that same sort of discipline. So think ahead about what you're going to say, how you'll say it, and then build the ability to respond based on clear observations and real insights that you've gathered from your leadership role. And then use that to choose the actions that are going to make things better for that underperformer. And so, something to remember is that in a position of leadership, you're going to be required to become better at a multitude of skills over time, because growth is part of the job. And so, this skill of giving feedback is going to be one of them. So plan your words carefully, because the degree of precision in your language as a leader while you're giving feedback is commensurate with the degree of respect that you are showing the people that you lead and that you are providing the feedback to. Another key theme in improving the way you give feedback is understanding context. So before you give feedback, I would encourage you to review where the action took place, why it happened, when it happened, how it was executed, and then what led up to it. And then once you understand those things and you're constructing your feedback, be precise, choose your words really carefully, because in this situation, words matter. And your timing is going to matter too. Your motivation to provide feedback has to go beyond your own desire or need to speak. So, useful feedback happens when people are both willing to hear it and you can also follow up with them. And so, on the other side of that, is there are also times where you should hesitate to give feedback. And those times are when you don't know enough to be reasonably sure of what happened. the person that you're considering giving feedback to won't be around long enough for you to do a follow up with them. The person that you're considering giving feedback to has no power to change the thing that you're talking about. The person has very low self esteem, and the act of giving them feedback is actually going to do more harm than good. If that's the case, you should delay the act of giving feedback, or you yourself are not in the right mental state to do it well. If there's any sort of emotionally charged issue that you are having to give feedback to, then you should delay that judgment and delay that feedback until you are in a better mental state. So here's how you can give feedback so that it lands better. Be descriptive rather than judgmental. Use specific recent examples. Describe the behavior rather than the person. This is going to help from feeling like the person you're giving feedback to is having their identity attacked, which means you're less likely to have to navigate ego issues. Don't exaggerate in the words you use. Be very careful of using quality. Be very careful of using qualitative and pejorative labels like immature, unprofessional, or irresponsible, things like that. Now, there are times when it is appropriate to use those things, but make sure that you are absolutely certain that it is. And then also speak for yourself when you're giving feedback. Don't be the messenger, don't be the voice of some group of anonymous others. And then phrase the issues that you're providing feedback about as clear statements rather than loaded or leading questions. And then lastly, stick to what you know with a reasonable degree of certainty. Don't present your personal opinions or other opinions as facts unless you know that they are. Now, another thing to remember with feedback is that numbers are often going to beat words. Now, people tend to react much less favorably to pure text or pure qualitative feedback rather than a combination of qualitative and numeric feedback, because numbers are much more specific. They're much more objective. There's a lot less emotion that goes into them because they highlight gaps in a much more objective way. That qualitative feedback is really hard to keep the attention on the task. If you use numeric or normative data, as the academics call it, you're able to keep the attention on the task itself, and it helps avoid any sort of ego comparisons. So the more numeric, the more quantitative you can make your feedback format, the better off it's going to be received. Now that we've introduced some general feedback principles, let's step into the Leadership Quarterly study that proves just how powerful feedback quality really is. So let's step into the lab. This study used 248 participants. They had those participants complete the same task, which was decoding a simple set of numbers into letters. There was no special skill required. There was no practice needed to accomplish the task, and the task didn't change across iterations. So it only required steady effort from the participants across the multiple set of variations. They used the same flat, fake pay for everyone. There was no bonuses and there were no winner prizes. So no matter how you did, you got the same amount of pay. The only difference was the quality of feedback that was given to the participants. So there was a no feedback group, which they did the task and they had no clue how they compared. There was a low quality feedback group where they got vague messages like, you're doing well or you're not doing well. And then there was a high quality feedback group where they were given their exact rank. So first, second, third, fourth, etc. Everything else in the experiment was controlled. Same task, same pay, only the feedback changed. And so this wasn't a survey that the researchers used. This was a controlled experiment. And this matters because it lets us see the cause and effect of when you only change one thing. And in this case, when they only change the feedback quality. And so to answer the question of How does feedback quality impact performance? Let's look at what the researchers actually found. Now, they made three predictions. The first was that even with no extra pay, people would still try. The third prediction was that any feedback that the participants got would raise effort. And the third prediction was high quality feedback would beat out vague feedback. And the main reason that they provided for this hypothesis was that people care about status. People care where they stand relative to others. And the analogy that they used in the study was a runner in a race. If you think about a runner that's far ahead of the pack, they often end up coasting. If you think of a runner that's far behind the pack, they often give up in terms of effort. But the runners that are in the pack, that are close to first, but not quite there, they're the ones that push the hardest. And so this was the analogy that they used to discuss how precise rankings relative to your peers' performance taps into that drive that people have. So when the target is clear and the target is close, your effort is going to surge. That's the general basis for their prediction. So what happened when they put it to the test? Well, here's the numbers. The average correct answer per round from the no feedback group was 23.7. The low quality feedback group answered 25.7 questions right, and the high quality feedback group answered 27.9. So, yes, it does seem like feedback helps, but it also seems like that precise feedback helps the most. Now, here's the other thing that they looked at, which is really interesting. They also looked at disengagement when it comes to feedback, or in other words, who stopped trying relative to what kind of feedback they got. In the no feedback group, 10% of the participants ended up quitting. In the low quality feedback group, 6% quit. In the high quality feedback group, 2% quit. So it seems like from this single study that high quality feedback doesn't just raise the average of output and performance, it also helps keep people in the game. The question is, why does it work this way? Well, there's three main drivers that the authors of this study offered in their discussion. First was status. People want to know where they stand relative to others. The second driver of this phenomenon that they offered was self esteem. So, clarity with where you stand and how you're doing builds confidence, even if you're not doing well. But vagueness on the opposite end of the spectrum erodes that confidence, erodes that self esteem. And then the third driver that the authors authored in this study was emotion. So vague feedback ends up frustrating people. It drains your energy and attention because you have to think about where you stand and why you stand there rather than being provided that answer. And then on the other end, precise feedback allows you to take that energy and attention and expend more effort into the actual task. It provides more motivation that way. So feedback, even though we try to make it not, it often ends up being a very emotional thing because vague reviews and vague feedback don't just confuse you, they end up aggravating you. It feels disrespectful when you get vague feedback, and you feel misunderstood when you get vague feedback. So emotions end up taking over to some degree or another, and performance is rarely going to improve when that happens. And sometimes, perhaps even often, depending on the person, it's going to end up getting worse. So the highlight here from this study is that vague feedback doesn't just fail the underperformers. It doesn't just fail the top performers. It's going to damage their performance, and it often does so really quickly. And so as a leader, you have to remember some of the options that you have while you're diagnosing and while you're constructing your feedback. Make sure that it's clear. Ask yourself real questions about this individual's competence, this individual's commitment, or circumstances that you're unaware of. Make sure that you're offering mentorship or training after you've given the feedback. Make sure that you're setting clear expectations so that they know where to aim and how to orient themselves, and then give them room to grow. Some people have longer tracks of acquiring skills and acquiring competence and acquiring enhancing their commitment. Some people just have to let certain circumstances blow over at the home with another team member. And so while you protect the team's output by elevating your high performers, you're also ensuring that you're completing another responsibility of a leader, and that is to develop your people over time. Now, that doesn't mean that you continue to give them time to fail. If someone is showing consistent underperformance over a long period of time, even with support and even with clear feedback, you might have to consider that it's time to at least move them out of the role. And unfortunately, you might have to consider that maybe it's time to move them off the team. And we'll cover that too. So, this is why leaders need a good playbook for giving feedback that sticks and that enhances performance. So, we're going to go over one. First item in your playbook for giving feedback could be recognizing the need for feedback. Don't wait for problems to pile up with your team or with other individuals. Early clarity in your feedback is going to beat late drama that is going to ensue when you avoid it. The second play in your playbook for giving feedback is giving both positive and negative feedback to all of your team members. People take good work for granted a lot of times, and I think that's a mistake. Recognition really matters, particularly to the top performers. They want to know that their effort is being recognized. And also, when people have heard your honest praise as a leader, they're also going to listen a lot more carefully whenever you give them a hard note and some feedback that they need to improve on. So, earn the right to correct your people by recognizing what they need to correct and recognizing what's actually right. Now, the third play in your playbook is understanding context. So make sure that you're checking the where, checking the why, how, and what before you end up speaking, because context, understanding context, protects your accuracy and protects your precision. The next play is understanding when to give feedback. So make sure that the person that you're trying to give feedback to is willing to receive it and willing to engage in the conversation. Make sure that after you've given feedback, you have an opportunity to follow up with them. Make sure that you have enough information so that you're armed with enough qualitative and quantitative data to bolster your argument. And then make sure that you're also in the right state of mind to do it well. If you're emotionally charged, it's going to be a lot harder for you to be objective in providing feedback. And if any of these aren't true, then I would advise you to wait. Now, the next play in your playbook needs to be knowing how to give feedback. So we've covered a lot of these, but I'll go over them again. Be descriptive, use specific and recent examples. Don't use labels, particularly pejorative ones. Don't exaggerate with your language. Don't be judgmental. Speak for yourself as opposed to being the messenger or speaking for others. Phrase issues as statements rather than leading questions or leading statements that are end up being traps. And then restrict your feedback to things you know for certain. Don't give feedback on things that are uncertain or things that are rumor or things that are just pure opinion. And then the last play in your playbook should be using numeric or normative formats whenever you can. The reason you do this is because numbers show gaps in performance clearly and they reduce any ego battle that you might have with someone. They point to the task really clearly rather than pointing to the person's identity, and they're going to avoid any ego issues. So Make your feedback measurable, make it actionable, make sure that you're providing at the right time with the right context and in the right state of mind. Next, I'm going to offer you some practical sentence stems. So, here are some examples that you could use to help give feedback. You could say, here's what I observed, here's the impact, here's where you stand right now, here's the next steps to improve, and then let's check back on this date to measure progress. What I would avoid is saying things like, everyone says this about you, you're just this thing, which is an identity attack. I would avoid using language like always or never, which is an exaggeration. And then I would also avoid using old examples from years ago, which is dug up in irrelevant history. Now, feedback isn't just an important thing that you have to get right. It's also an important thing that you should try to get your team to get right. And to do that, you have to build the process of good feedback into the culture of your team. And there's a couple ways you can do that. One is to normalize it. Make sure that other people know it's okay to give feedback. Make sure that they know how to give feedback. And if they don't, one, learn it yourself. And then second, teach them how to do it. Make sure that everyone agrees on your team that feedback is an important and acceptable and desirable part of how the team works. And then in your personal life, for how you are mentored as a leader, make sure that you're choosing people who seek and value your feedback and who are willing to give it to you. So normalize clarity, normalize the process of giving feedback, and make it part of your team's. Now, feedback is only half the question. You also need to know how to receive it. So we're going to cover how do you receive a feedback like a professional. The first thing that you have to get right is your mindset. The approach that I would take if I was a leader, the approach that I took while I was in positions of leadership was that I would assume that there's something that I don't know. And for the moment that you are getting the feedback, accept that you are not what you could be yet. And the person speaking may give you a piece of information that helps you get there. So approach it with humility, in other words. Now, if someone needs to give you feedback, but they don't know how to give you feedback, use the rules that we've just discussed to help them and coach them. And you can help reshape their raw criticism into information that's really useful. There's a couple simple tools that you can use that help you receive feedback easier. One is really simple, and that's breathing in a way that relaxes your body and helps your brain stay alert. Two is listen, shut your mouth, don't interrupt, and listen what they have to say. Third is ask really good, pointed questions to clarify what exactly they mean. And then once you understood what they mean, paraphrase that back to them so that you confirm that what you are receiving is what they are trying to communicate. If you're able to acknowledge what is valid, what is true, or what is possible, and then take time after you've gotten the feedback to process before you respond to them or before you end up changing course. Because it's important to remember that when you're receiving feedback, agreeing that a point is true does not necessarily mean that you have to change your behavior right away. It also doesn't mean that you are accepting any value judgment about you. It just means that you are thinking. So remember that strong leaders should be listening first and then deciding second. Once you've received that feedback, when it makes sense, schedule a follow up meeting so that you can talk more. And if the person giving feedback is someone who you would trade places with in the domain that they are giving you feedback in, or they have something that you desire or that you admire, related to the work that they are giving you feedback about, then make sure you leave that meeting strongly considering their guidance. Now, at the same time, as it's as important as it is to know how to give feedback, to know how to receive feedback, it's also important to know when to not give feedback. Now, there are smart times when leaders should hold their fire when it comes to giving feedback. You should hold fire whenever you lack the facts and you can't be reasonably sure about what's happened. You should hesitate to give feedback when the person won't be around to follow up with, when they have no power to change the thing that you're addressing, when their self esteem is really fragile, and when the timing would cause more harm than good, or when you're not in the right state of mind. So, whenever you're giving feedback or receiving feedback, remember that it's a tool for improvement, and tools work best when they're used correctly. And in this case, feedback is best used with discernment and discipline. So, right message, right moment, right mindset, regardless of whether or not you're receiving or giving feedback. And when you do it or when you receive it, numbers often make the message land better than words alone. So if you're giving feedback, make sure that there's numbers behind it. When you're receiving feedback, make sure that you're getting numbers behind it as well. And the reason why numbers help is because people react much less favorably to the qualitative feedback without numbers rather than to the numeric or normative data. Numbers make gaps really visible. They point to tasks rather than personal worth or ego investments. And they also reduce the it's just your opinion fight that might ensue. And this 2022 study in the Leadership Quarterly supports all this. When people saw their rank rather than a vague line like you're doing well or you're not doing well, their output went up and fewer people gave up. So when it comes to feedback, clarity is going to beat comfort every time. And numbers help make the change real. There are going to be times as a leader where you keep giving clear and precise feedback to your performers, whether they're underperformers or they're top performers. You can offer mentorship, you can set your expectations, you can give time to season, but you still see long term underperformance trends. Now, this becomes a leadership decision, and you're really left with three options. One, you continue doing what you're doing. Two, you move them out of the role and keep them on the team and allow them to be developed further. Or three, you move them off the team because their underperformance negatively impacts the team to such a degree that you can't wait any longer. So even when it comes to giving performance, you still have to keep in mind what the mission is. You still have to keep in mind how to support the person, and you have to do both with clarity. And sometimes supporting the person means moving them out of the role that they're in so they can be developed further with a much less sophisticated set of tasks. Now, leadership doesn't just look backwards. In the case we've been talking about is feedback. Sometimes with leadership, the smarter tool is actually looking forward. And so we're going to go over this concept called feed forward. And this is a future facing tool rather than a past looking tool like feedback. Feedback looks backwards. It tells you what's already happened and provides commentary on that. Feed forward, as it sounds, looks forward. It asks questions like, how can we do this better next time? And what should you try? What's the next move? There's a giver's role in it, so trying to help as much as possible. And then there's a receiver's role in it, which is trying to learn as much as possible. And it's very, very similar to athletic coaching. You focus on how to be correct rather than proving someone was wrong, which also helps avoid the ego battle. And it not only orients people towards the future, it provides them the structure and the support that they need to move towards the future. So again, feedback shows the past, provides commentary on the past. Feed forward helps build the path to move them forward in their development journey. And feed forward strategies also have other benefits. One, it can come from anyone who understands the task. So it doesn't have to be from a leader, it can also come from a peer. You also don't need a long personal history with the individual that you're providing it to. People take it less personally because it's about what hasn't happened yet rather than what's already happened. So there's no ego investment in it. And what's interesting about it is from the research and my observations using it, that the high achievers actually prefer it over feedback. That keeps their strong sense of self image intact and it provides them with big goals to strive for, which they really like. And high performers also tend to resist negative feedback, but they embrace the more constructive and positive possibilities of the future. Now, this doesn't mean you never give feedback. Formal appraisals still matter. They matter for trend tracking, they matter for documenting performance when it comes to making an argument to get rid of someone or to promote someone. The point with feed forward is that in the day-to-day interactions, feed forward is often more productive because it's much more positive in nature. So let's go over a few practical strategies on how to use feed forward strategies. The main thing is keeping it really short and really clear and really precise. Saying things like, here's what to try next time. Here's one change that could raise your results. Here's how to be more successful with this. Here's something to test. And after you've tested it, let's review it. There's a huge difference in tone because it involves the future. It's very specific and it tends to be received as a lot more helpful. So, like I said, it's much more akin to coaching than feedback is because you're coaching the next rep rather than the last one. So, that's why both strategies are really, really effective. Now, you obviously have people that respond to feedback or feed forward differently depending on their motivations. So, this is another thing you have to consider when trying to give feedback or now feed forward is understanding that people are not motivated the same way. Some responses trigger their desire for status and trigger their desire for rank, while others are driven by self improvement or goal pursuits. And as a leader, your job and your responsibility is to the degree that you're able to find out what drives each person the most, which can be really hard. It can take a ton of time, but the effort is worth it. Now, people, particularly younger people, may not even know what drives them yet. So asking them might not be all that helpful, or they may not trust you enough to say it. So keep working, pay attention, use clear ranks when they help, and then make sure that you're providing growth paths that fit the individual. And the point is to match the lever to each individual person. So let's put this all together. Here's a quick protocol that you guys can take away from this video. When you're in a position of leadership and you notice that performance from an individual dips, ask yourself, is it competence? Is it commitment? Or is it circumstance? When trying to construct your support strategy, ask yourself, do they need mentorship? Do they need training? Do they need clear expectations from me? Or do they need more time to figure it out? And then make sure that you're measuring things correctly and precisely using numbers and using normative data whenever you can. When you do go and give feedback, use clear, recent, specific examples with no pejorative labels and no exaggerative language. And then on top of that, make sure you're tacking on some feed forward strategies. Provide them ideas on what they can try next time and what they can try to make things better next time. And then once you've given that feedback and that feed forward advice multiple times and performance still doesn't change, well, then it's time to consider if they need to be changed into a different role, if they need to be demoted into a different role, or they need to be removed from the team, which is a leadership decision. So, diagnose, support, measure, feedback, feed forward, and then decide. So, to make all this stick, let's go over some simple guidelines again. When you give feedback, recognize the need, give both positive and negative, understand the context, know when to speak, know how to speak, be descriptive, use labels, don't exaggerate, don't be judgmental, speak for yourself, phrase issues as statements rather than questions, stick to what you know, not what you don't, and then use numeric, quantitative formats whenever you can. When you're receiving feedback, make sure you breathe, make sure you listen carefully, ask questions to clarify, acknowledge the feedback, acknowledge the valid points, and then take the time you need to process it. Remember that feedback only works long term if it's part of your organizational culture. So make sure that you're ingraining this into your people that it's okay and it's desirable to give and receive feedback. Do this at the team level. Agree that giving and receiving feedback is acceptable, it's expected, it's desirable. Make it part of how you improve the team together. And do this in your personal life too. Choose to be around people who seek and value the feedback as a way to grow your relationships and grow the way that you work. What does all this mean for you as a leader? Well, the bottom line is vague feedback is useless and it's often harmful. It often ends up dropping performance. It often ends up increasing disengagement. Precise feedback, on the other hand, is going to raise performance. It's going to prevent disengagement. And then if you include numbers and if you include quantitative data when you give feedback, it's going to help people focus on the task rather than the ego because it helps them see an objective gap. And then feed forward turns the future into a much more clear plan. And so leaders who can master both feedback and feed forward strategies, giving and receiving, are going to create teams that learn and that are going to improve a lot faster. So if you're wrestling with underperformance on your team, don't just punish the people that are underperforming. Don't just pay them more and don't just wait for them to start improving. Start with clear feedback, start with clear feed forward strategies. And if any of this helped, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Join me inside the Leadership Lab on YouTube and on School, where we take issues like this and dig into the deeper science based strategies so that you can lead, you can motivate, and you can end up winning.